Good afternoon and good evening. Happy Tuesday, LinkedIn friends, Value First Nation. Welcome to another episode of Value First Data with Chris, Casey, and Klemen. How are we doing?
Doing good. Excited.
Good. Happy St. Patrick's Day. The corned beef is making progress from this morning.
I am 0 for 4 on wishing happy St. Patrick's Day instead of Happy Tuesday.
And this is your last one of the day, right? Or do you have another?
Maybe we can fit another one in. I think. Yeah. No, this is the last one for sure.
You deserve a pint of a good beer.
Green beer, yeah.
Yeah.
I did almost grab. Almost grabbed one of my non-alcoholic beers in distress at some point earlier today, and I was like, "Well, it's St. Patrick's Day, so I'll have that." But then I grabbed coffee, and that worked. That did the trick too.
Speaking of unified revenue views.
Thanks. You're welcome. I feel like my purpose in life is to make it difficult for Chris to transition.
A good purpose. That's as long as you know what your purpose is. That's step one. Last week we started down the path of unified revenue view, and we took a minute to describe what it was before we dove into this playbook. I have not been able to update the slide to include marketing yet, but still on my mind. Marketing will be involved throughout this process of supporting and understanding what a unified revenue view is for the organization. But this week we're going to start going through the playbook. And before we dive in, anything has happened since last week that unified revenue view came up in conversation or came to mind, or we learned anything?
Klemen first.
Value first. Thinking that was a particular conversation around that. Not really. For us, it was just a lot of internal discussions around what will be the interface to all that data at some point, more than external conversations. I mean, I did have several discussions where, of course, data consolidation comes into part. One was around unified view. A company transitioned everything to HubSpot, and after a year they're happy they did that because now they have data centralized so they can build stuff. So there were discussions. So this is an ongoing topic for sure.
I think there were opportunities over the past week where a unified revenue view would have been helpful. I can think of like 2 sales conversations that I had this week that if I had a unified revenue view, I think that would have like immediately given me context to kind of go into those sales conversations more confidently, but also the data to back some of the sales like choices that I was making, if that makes sense. Specifically around like what's the right price point for these projects is really the big thing.
Okay. How would you, since you used that specific use case?
Dang it.
Very
I
interesting.
gave too good of an answer.
How do you imagine you would have used visibility into a unified revenue view to support that conversation?
Well, one of these is an existing client that we're looking at changing the scope on some. So from that standpoint, looking at the unified revenue view, I think would have given me a little more context on kind of what the monetary value, to be clear, of that client has been to me so far, which would give me a little bit of a better understanding, one, on like the revenue growth potential, but also, sometimes we're trading things off. I like how George will often say, his wife says that he doesn't have clients, he has friends that pay him money. And I think that's certainly how I look at my clients as well. But so from that perspective, if I have a friend who's paying me money and we want to change the scope a little bit, seeing kind of what the history of the account would help me kind of balance the effort versus the monetary value that I'm receiving. Does that make sense? Was that political enough?
It was. And I think this is the tough part about using words that people know to try and do new things, right? Because like unified revenue view, I'm using revenue because that's the word that everybody wants, like related to this view. But what we know from the past is that usually it's an incomplete view, and there's separate silos of, either it's straight financial view and it's in the back office systems and accounting and it's dollars and cents, or it's kind of gut feel on forecasting information that's not connected to the other set of data. And the reason it's not is what you were alluding to, especially in the world where pricing was the number one factor, whether or not you might do business with somebody or get them to buy. Like if you just want their logo on your website, like, and you're discounting it like for free or something like that, like to get the business, you've in that moment defined value in a different way that's not monetary.
That's true.
Right? And the area of the organization in Value First Land that this would sit under is financial org, but it's from the perspective of the financial org, their role, and the reason it's not revenue org is somebody's got to keep track of value flow, like all over the place, right? Like how much is going out, effort, goodwill, free trials, like, yeah, we'll spend an hour. Let's get together on Friday. We don't have to charge for it. Like let's just have a conversation, right? There's value going out, and it usually doesn't true up nicely, especially with AI around, to the ways that we used to count value coming in, right? It's just like hours given at this amount equals this expectation, right? When we can take a step back and understand that and have this unified customer view underneath to really understand the people involved, like we have a chance at starting to understand that. And when we can understand like all the goals that people have of forecasting accurately, coming up with value-based pricing that makes sense and can be repeatable, we're in a time now that AI can handle that complexity if we give it the guardrails to do so. So when we say unified revenue view, this is where we measure the value flow of the organization, right? In order to do that, we need a unified customer view because there's people involved making decisions, and if we just like, this is a super important customer, Klemen owns these accounts. Klemen owns the spreadsheet that's over here. And so because we've agreed to that, there's no reason to keep those contacts in the CRM. And like we're missing a whole section of the view of the data that supports these views. So all of a sudden, we're never telling the whole story. And we can make some pretty poor decisions based on that lack of context. And as we keep coming back to, AI doesn't know that there's missing context in those scenarios. So it'll say, and this is the kind of stuff that destroys trust in the system. And I promise to move forward in the playbook at some point. But like the organization knows that Klemen and his accounts that are outside of the CRM are like 60% of the revenue of the org. So like when we ask people to report out of these systems, knowing that data, like it just reduces the credibility of the system, the will to want to maintain the system, and it starts to break all these things down. So it's definitely a structured approach to unified customer view first, and then unified revenue view on top. Any exceptions come to mind as to when it might be okay to start with the unified revenue
No. A unified revenue view without unified customer view is your accounting system, where you only see or P&L sheet. This is the unified revenue view without context about a customer. And this is not enough to understand what's happening with the customers. So for the CFO, yes, maybe a unified customer view can be a P&L wherever without a unified customer view. But for revenue related functions, I think these two are connected, or unified customer view is always the underlying foundation you need to have.
Yeah. And when I first started building this out, I was hedging a little bit and saying maybe there's times where we need to get sales interested in the process. And if they're going to want, like everybody wants the unified revenue view, right? Especially as we describe it here with good forecasts. And maybe you'll have to use that to like get to the unified customer view. Like I used to do that with quoting in HubSpot. Like if you can get quoting like as an important initiative, then all of a sudden we got to put the sales process in HubSpot. Sorry. But now you don't really have to do that. Like what we're seeing is people understand the need and the value of a unified customer view. So it's going to be tempting to start here to think like you're in RevOps. Like, is this not your main role, right? But if you start here without a unified customer view, it's going to be a lot harder to get to. So with that said, these must be in place before starting revenue view implementation. Contact object will say configured with value path properties or lifecycle stages, if that's where you want to go. Company object configured with account health properties. So many ways we could go with that. But again, we've already done the unified customer view, so we're not daunted by the prospect that we need health properties. Of course, they're in there. And associations are working. An interesting call, like today, when associations just don't ever assume that people know what's happening here. Like a very, somebody was having trouble with the word parent, right? And they were using it in the context of contact and company association, right? Which is why I just want to remove the word parent from any system. Like I see it, like parent and primary, right? Those words they don't mean anything, right? It's billing, it's shipping, it's buyer, it's sales. It's like labels that mean something in the system. Again, it's what Value First is all about: using common language, understanding those, and that they're working.
But if you remove parent-child relationship between two companies, how do you name that relationship? Like subsidiaries and the mother company? I mean, what's the relationship?
Like billing and shipping is one of the easiest ones. And the reason is because like parent-child over here might not mean the same as parent-child over here, right? So in this parent-child situation, we're billing the parent and we're shipping to the child. In this scenario, we are billing and shipping to the child, but it needs to roll up like to the parent, right? So in those cases, like, because I think in general, what we want to avoid is the same, like we're looking at the same words in the CRM, and we've got to figure out other contexts to make sure the definition in that moment like is understood, right? And parent and child is the least, like, I think, tangible way, especially like there's a Salesforce instance today: parent, grandparent, great grandparent. Like, no, it's not. There's got to be a better way. Like, there is a better way. We just haven't designed the data model like to support it, because there are better words like subsidiary, or the way that, because usually we're not calling that company like a grandparent, like in our vernacular as we're talking about the account, right? Talking about the regional like headquarters, or the US office, stuff like that. And then we've got teams actively using customer view for relationship context. HubSpot tier verification. Included features needed for revenue visibility. Sales Hub Professional or Enterprise for deals and forecasting. Commerce Hub acquired for CPQ quoting, and we got some pricing there. And I mean, you might want to take that down in case it's changed. And then Operations Hub or Data Hub for
Operations Hub still a thing? It disappeared.
I'm okay with this because there's still places inside of HubSpot that say Operations Hub.
Okay.
But it's Data Hub. Got some work to do. Right, maintenance of data for advanced automation. And this is where, like, again, revenue visibility comes from like past, present, future, like revenue understanding is what we're trying to achieve here. That's where unification. You can't have sales outlook, in their heads and in the sales meetings talking about forecasting and 70% this and 80% that. And then over on the other side of the fence, they can see, real data related to that. We've got to find a way to unify those. And in most instances, they haven't been speaking the same language, or the systems won't allow you to speak the same language in some of these cases. So when you have that, Data Hub can do a lot of work in terms of data transformation in the way that we name things around the portals. Got Commerce Hub seat planning. At the heart of this, it's understanding roles and responsibilities, like who's using the system. And then current state documentation. Before we get to current state, see, like I've already blown up this plan. Like, if you get past page 1, like I don't know that we're gonna check any of those boxes. Like, I just want to run away from all those boxes that we just saw. But as far as users, like, and this is where it should be. Like, you're either in HubSpot or you're out of HubSpot for most of this part of the process. Do any challenges come to mind for you guys as you're trying to understand things like the quote to cash process and who's doing what in the org?
I feel like, and I shared this story last time we talked, but it feels like it's mostly owned by the accounting team with like sales support in many ways, which I think is part of what I've seen frustration or issues with is the sales team not being in, QuickBooks or whatever your accounting platform of choice is, but almost kind of often being held to the needs of QuickBooks or whatever. Does that make sense?
Certainly does. How about you, Klemen?
In my experience, these are two different roles where sales is really going to have it closed one and then the agreement signed, and really the invoicing is happening not necessarily through the sales rep who closed the deal, which means the quote can be approved and signed, agreement signed, easily visible within HubSpot, but then the invoices would often happen, and cash coming would often happen outside of HubSpot. So there's, you need to be mindful of bringing that loop in, the data in, so you have it in sync. With one of our customers, I saw a case. A RevOps person had a dashboard which was basically monitoring, comparing the total revenue on closed won deals in HubSpot against what they have in their accounting system, and their goal was to have that less than 3% difference, which means HubSpot is aligned with what they're charging, and invoicing is happening. Then they can trust for the forecasting the data in HubSpot. They don't need to always sync. If that is below 3% error, they're in good shape for revenue data being fully trustable in HubSpot. And from my understanding, they were not, sales reps, and sales team was not sending the invoices. And especially for SaaS, I think this is a common theme where you have subscriptions. These subscriptions are renewing automatically every month. No one is sending you the invoice. With services, of course, this is different, but with SaaS, this is for often happening outside of HubSpot. So there needs to be kind of a loop back in to fetch the relevant data.
Yeah. And I think that's where the health score we mentioned above, like if you can't get like invoice data like into HubSpot, you can often get like payment status or account status. And that's where like it doesn't have to be a score, right? It can just be like, are they up to date on their payments? Like, and that's what the property is telling you. And often there are teams like supporting that, or sales is trying to do the work to keep that up to date. Oftentimes, like you can't bring the data into HubSpot, but we're going to make sure we're on that email that has this invoice associated or attached so that we can see it in HubSpot that way. Because hopefully no one's surprised that we need, like, salespeople want to know financial health of the account, in most cases, I'll say.
Yeah.
Current state documentation. Document your existing processes before configuring new capabilities. Existing deal pipeline stages documented. I'd say we probably have that as an outcome of the unified customer view already. Current quote proposal process understood. Product catalog and pricing models documented. Approval workflow requirements identified. Order fulfillment workflow mapped. Invoice payment process documented, and recurring revenue tracking method identified. Where do you want to start?
This is a lot. This is where we really start veering away from, I feel like, the unified view and into alignment, which is often shockingly misunderstood, especially in these areas. Like, a lot of these feel like they should be fairly straightforward, but I can imagine where the invoice and payment process is, if it's not documented, and it's really inconsistent depending on the person, potentially.
Yeah. I mean, they're straightforward outside of HubSpot. I'd say 80+%, or maybe 70+% of the customer base cares about the first one inside of HubSpot, and not any of the other ones. Like, so they might care about the other ones, they just don't care about it inside of HubSpot, which is part of this process. Like, creating visibility requires this data, right? And important, if Unified Customer View Foundation is not complete, stop here and complete that playbook first. We need relationship context as its foundation. Like, this is why, like, if you have this, if you're in sales or marketing or even leadership, right? And then we come back to the importance of the words that we use, and that's where these frameworks are. It's why they're powerful. If you say, hey, accounting, can we put invoice information into HubSpot? Like, it's an easy no. Like, it's an easy no if you've never told them before why you need it in HubSpot. But when you say, hey, accounting, you remember that meeting where we decided that the unified revenue view was important to the organization, right? And you said yes emphatically because you want people to pay on time, and that might be a good way to get them to pay on time. So now we're ready to do that And how would you like us to get the data? Or how do you recommend we get the data? Or can you talk to this person that can help get the data from the accounting system and into the place where we all agreed that the unified revenue view needs to be? Right? All of these lines, like I would argue it's like the ecosystem has a tough time having this conversation. And that's why, like, it's so hard to combat. Well, HubSpot's not the place where that we do that.
Mm-hmm.
Have either of you found any other solutions or challenges related to this problem?
I think the best solution I have, and this is generally my solution whenever there's any unified data or, not, backlash to putting the visibility into HubSpot specifically, is just finding the way it helps. So in the accounting team's instance, for example, they usually want the sales team to be following up. They want the sales team to be doing the invoices. They don't want to be the ones sending all this stuff. So if you're able to kind of convince them that how this helps them, that just tends to be the only solution that I feel like works for any. And that's also a life hack, everyone. If you want anyone to do anything, just figure out how it helps them.
I think in a way it goes down to responsibility and accountability of something. If you want reps to be responsible for the invoicing and payment process, they need to have access to data. Do they need to follow up with someone? Is the invoice overdue? If you don't get them the data, there is no way they can act on it or react. So if you want them, if not, accounting doesn't want to do that, then obviously you need to have the data. Otherwise, it will be just a lot of communication for nothing, checking that. And I can guarantee you then sales reps will not be asking accounting for that information. So the responsibility will be on accounting, who doesn't want to do that. And then I think it's a good chance to have that conversation. So if you want to take that responsibility from you to the other team, that's what we need to do to enable them, to give them notifications, data they need.
So a big part of our process, like during value for scoping, is understanding that responsibility matrix, but also giving tools to people to understand what the responsibilities probably should be. And I need to document this thing I've been saying for a couple of years. Like this list of stuff, which is like very explosive conversations result when you start to question all of the things that we're looking at here, whether it's sales who owns deals, customer teams that owns order fulfillment, accounting that owns invoices, right? It's just very tricky conversations to get out of like in one piece and actually make progress, right? So a way that has helped me, because we're also not in the world where there's one system of truth and one system of record. Like we've already agreed that multiple people need a unified revenue view. They need this information. The conversation about where the data is and where do we trust it the most, like just doesn't make sense. Like everybody viewing this data needs to trust it, right? So since it needs to be in multiple places and we're accepting that, like I break it into 3 categories. And I don't know if I've ever asked you this, Klemen. I'm sure you've got a similar framework or something to say, like, there's 3 categories of what we need to do with data, right? And it needs to be created, it needs to be managed, and it needs to be communicated, right? And when we say it's going to be a part of a unified revenue view, that's communicating it to the team, right? And HubSpot just happens to be maybe the best system on the planet at doing that across teams and up and down the org in a user-friendly kind of way, right? Then we need to manage the data, right? Maybe that's in HubSpot, like through Data Hub, and like once it's in the system, are we transforming it? Are we maintaining it? Are customers allowed to help maintain it? As unstructured data and AI, like maintaining it. And then we need to create the data, which again, if people are paying into a system and it's going into accounting, right, the data gets created in the accounting system. And then maybe that team is managing it over there, and then it flows into HubSpot where it can be communicated, right? You think is there any gaps there, or when you talk about data maintenance and who owns what where? Klemen, do you ever get into stuff like this?
I think it's a good framework, and especially for creation of data, I would say that's fine if that happens outside of HubSpot. Invoicing, accounting, I think is a good example. But yeah, the communication and management of the data, even the management can still happen outside. Invoices, the automatic overdue notifications can still happen within your accounting system. That's fine. But the status of that, so the relevant pieces of information around that would need to be in the place where the responsible person for that needs it. So it's the communication of that data. And the trustworthiness of the data, which is basically a sum of all 3, I think is what you need to achieve one way or another. Because in my experience, as soon as the consumers of that data, for whatever reason, start not trusting it and are checking if that they see is what they need to see, is it correct? If they will start acting on data which was wrong for whatever reason, they will stop using that source of data, which means all 3 that you mentioned are kind of summing up to trustworthiness or up to date, updateness or whatever the best word is. But if the data they see is not what they need to see, if it's incorrect, the whole system will break.
Yeah. And then all 3 categories happen outside of the system. And then you start communicating the data to the system. Like, it's just because that's what you have to do, like to get your commissions or, whatever. Right. And that's for creation of data. Like, if I don't trust the data in the system and it just made me look bad because I used bad data when talking to a customer, now I'm coming out of the system. I'm sending an email, which is the creation of data. And now, as like salespeople change prices in emails, and now you're managing, data, right? And like communication is happening, but then whether it gets into the system or not, is the problem we're trying to solve here. So hopefully that framework, helps break it down. Because, and one of my favorite examples of why, if you're going to enter into this domain, you have to understand that people are using best practices based on systems not designed for great communication. QuickBooks is the example,
Mm-hmm.
the most common accounting system like on the planet, and you can only associate one contact
Mm-hmm.
to, and it's not even a contact, it's just like an email address, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, and so the customer says, oh, can you send that to these 5 people? Right? Because we need to understand it. We need visibility. And then QuickBooks literally cannot do that for you.
Mm-hmm.
Guess what can? Like HubSpot. And that's how you get like 90-day collection cycles down to less than 30 days. And accounting loves that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one of the easiest ways to get accounting on board. But their reference is the way it's been done in these accounting systems. So it's not anybody's fault. But also, if they go to AI now, AI is going to tell them things like that too. Like, what are you doing using HubSpot for invoicing? Like, that's not what HubSpot's for. It's like, no, I'm not doing the invoicing. We're not reconciling. We're just communicating it because we can easily associate 5 contacts. And now all 5 are getting the invoice automatically. How about that? Any final thoughts, Casey Hawkins, as we wrap up?
We got you heated today. I think I really like that we're talking about unified revenue view because I feel like people don't think about HubSpot and unified revenue view, but that's a mistake because it is kind of foundational to communicating across the team. Like I just think it's an undervalued integration, I guess.
Yeah. And when it is thought of,
Mm-hmm.
and this is where like, okay, revenue view, and this is why I have trouble with the language.
Mm-hmm.
Like RevOps, it's like, okay, they're going to own the unified revenue view. This is their revenue operations. Okay, great.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, do they own the ERP system or the accounting data or any of that?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, they're just focused on marketing and sales? Okay, I guess we're not going to get an actual unified revenue view then.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So hopefully this helps. If I could call it a unified value view, I might, but then nobody knows what the hell that means. So here we are. Anything before next week, Klemen?
A thought that is jumping through my head is that the unified revenue is way more about the alignment than unified customer view is. For the revenue view, it's really, you know, the accountability and responsibility of different teams.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have that written down or spoken out, you will have a hard time configuring, you know, whatever. Is it in HubSpot or wherever you are? If you don't have that alignment, who is responsible for what and for which actions throughout that, you'll have a hard time configuring that. And you'll always be just battling why we need that data here, because every data sync, every data push from somewhere to somewhere requires someone maintaining that integration, managing it, so that you can then, you know, communicate in a trustworthy manner. And if you don't have that alignment, why you need that data in that place, it will be just hard to have that system in place. So that was
I feel like
opening for me today.
I feel like the unified customer view is about like enablement, and the unified revenue view is about alignment.
Yeah.
No? Dang, I feel like I was close.
I think they're all about alignment.
Well,
and maybe all about enablement. That's why, like, they need to all be about visibility. And I think like it's easier to get alignment on the unified customer view. Like there's a lot of lower risk conversations that you can have. And like another reason that one comes first is if you have just completed that process and people are believing in the concept of unified views can even happen. Now all the conversations you need to have to align on unified revenue view, right? Because it's not going to get any easier. Like when we get to business context, you're putting strategy like together with real data and like subjective thoughts. We're running into this, with our clients of like, well, on paper, it looks like this is the thing we're doing next, but leadership has made a decision that we're not focused on that division. So everything you just said was incorrect. And like, like having empathy for that person. How could they know? It's not documented anywhere in the system. They're not involved in those conversations. And then the last view is true enablement, where everybody has the visibility they need for all aspects of the job. And, everybody can just move forward without concern or uncertainty. So we're going to keep chugging along. Looks like next week we got a current state audit for the unified revenue view as we continue down the playbook path here. So thank you, Klemen and Casey.
Thank you.
Everybody have a great week.
Bye.
See you next week.